I remember the day the house fell quiet. Not the ordinary quiet that comes in the afternoon when everyone is at work, or the gentle silence of early morning before the sun rises. This was a heavy quiet, the kind that feels like the air itself is holding its breath, the kind that wraps around your chest and makes it hard to inhale. It was the first morning without my grandmother in our home. Her chair in the kitchen was still there. The one with the worn cushion she insisted was perfectly fine. The tea mug with the little blue flowers sat upside down on a towel near the sink, just like she always left it. And the faded cardigan she wore almost every day still hung on the hook by the door. But the house no longer had her warmth. I stood there, staring at her empty chair, and for the first time in my life, I realized that silence can be louder than any sound. And I wondered if I should have seen it coming. Maybe I did see it. Maybe I just didn't want to believe it. Because my grandmother had always been here. Like the walls, like the trees outside, like time. She was the steady thing in a world that kept changing. And I, being young and wrapped up in my own life, assumed she would always be here. But life doesn't work that way. It was a small town we lived in. A quiet place where neighbors knew one another and waved when passing on the street. Our house was old. 2 floors, creaky floors, the smell of wood and sunlight and old memories. The kind of house that holds stories in every corner. The kind of house you don't realize is alive until someone who gives it meaning is gone. My grandmother had lived with us since before I was born. She wasn't fragile then. She was strong, quick, constantly moving. She woke before everyone else, swept the porch, folded laundry, hummed to herself while stirring pots of stew or slicing apples for pie. I remember being little and watching her hands. They were wrinkled and soft, but there was strength in them. The kind of strength that comes from years of holding a family together, quietly, patiently, without asking for anything in return. She didn't talk much about the past, but I knew she came from a time when life was hard, when people didn't talk about their feelings. They just bore them. And she had this way of looking at people, a long, steady look, like she could see the thoughts behind your face. We were close, but not in the way where we talked about everything. It was more the comfort of simply existing near someone, sitting beside her on the porch in silence, drinking tea at the kitchen table while she read the newspaper, walking slowly to the end of the street and back, just to feel the sun. I didn't have to speak for her to understand me, and I thought that meant she knew how much I loved her. Think she did. But love that isn't. Spoken can sometimes feel invisible. And as she got older, I got busier. School, friends, university applications, late night studying, part-time jobs, plans for the future, dreams of leaving this small town and proving something to the world. Meanwhile, time moved slowly for her. Her steps became shorter. Her hands shook a little when she poured tea. She started repeating things she had already said, and sometimes she just sat quietly staring out the window, as if listening to something only she could hear. But I didn't see these things as warnings. I saw them as life simply happening. My mother was kind to her, most of the time, but she was busy too. Work, bills, responsibilities. She tried, I know she did, but patience is hard when you are tired. And my grandmother needed help with small things now. Tying her apron, opening jars, reaching the top shelf. And these small needs accumulated in the corners of daily life. My father. He was distant. Not cruel, but absent even when in the room. He didn't dislike my grandmother. But he didn't love her either. She was his mother-in-law, a part of his life, but not from his heart. So the house changed in slow, quiet ways, tiny moments, a sigh of annoyance when she forgot something, a rushed tone when she asked a question again, a tense silence at the dinner table, nothing dramatic, nothing loud, just small, sharp edges that began to form in the air. And I, being young, quiet and observing, noticed everything and did nothing, because I believed families sorted themselves out, because I believed love was understood without being spoken, because I believed there would be time later, to sit with her, to talk, to make her smile the way she used to. Time is an easy thing to take for granted when you think you have a lot of it. But life isn't kind just because you want it to be. One evening, I found her sitting alone on the back porch. She was staring at the sky, the kind of sky that has streaks of pink and orange as the sun sets behind the trees. I sat beside her without saying anything. She didn't look at me. She just smiled softly, her eyes still on the horizon. "You're growing up," she said. "I guess," I replied. "You'll go far," she said. "You have the kind of heart that sees things." I didn't know what she meant back then. I just nodded. She continued, "Seeing is a blessing. But if you see and stay silent, it becomes a burden." I looked at her then, her profile against the fading light, her eyes soft but tired in a way I hadn't noticed before. I didn't ask what she meant. I wish I had. Because later, when everything fell apart, those words would echo inside me. Louder than any memory. Seeing is a blessing, but if you see and stay silent, it becomes a burden. And I carried that burden for years. The change did not happen suddenly. I think that's the part that hurts the most when I look back. There was no single moment where everything broke. No shouting, no dramatic confrontation, no slammed doors. It was quieter than that. It was gradual, like watching a flower wilt. Not in a storm, but simply because no one remembered to water it. My grandmother was still gentle, still soft-spoken, still trying to be useful, but the house seemed to move faster than she could now. Conversations moved too quickly. Plans changed without including her. Days blurred into one another. She still got up early. She still made tea, but she began to wait for instructions, for permission, for a place to stand, and that waiting aged her more than time ever could. I remember one morning in particular. I had come downstairs, tired from studying late the night before. I found my grandmother standing in the kitchen, holding a loaf of bread. She looked confused. She asked quietly, "Do we cut it for breakfast or save it?" I can't remember what we usually do. My mother, who was rushing to leave for work, sighed, too loudly. "Just leave it," she said, grabbing her purse. "I'll do it later. Just sit, okay? Please." The please sounded more like exhaustion than kindness. My grandmother nodded and sat. But she didn't touch her tea. She looked small. Lost almost, I noticed it. I saw the sadness in her eyes, and still, I said nothing. I sat across from her, poured my own tea, and we sat together in silence. She kept her hands folded tightly in her lap, like she was afraid they might tremble and give her away. Later that day, I heard my mother talking on the phone in the hallway. No, she's not sick or anything. Just slower, forgetful. And I don't know how much longer we can manage like this. I'm trying, but it's getting hard. Her voice cracked on that last word. It wasn't anger, it was exhaustion. And I didn't know who to feel sorry for. My grandmother, who was fading, or my mother, who was drowning under the weight of responsibility. Maybe both. My father cared, in the way a man cares about things he can't quite touch. He made sure there was food in the house. He fixed the chair when it broke. He drove her to appointments. But there was a distance there, a polite distance, a boundary that said, "I will help, but I do not know how to love you." My grandmother never asked him for more. She never asked anyone for more. She was a woman from a generation that learned to make themselves small, to be grateful for whatever space they were given, to endure quietly. And because she did not complain, none of us realized how deeply she was hurting. Or maybe we realized, and pretended not to. There were conversations about her care. Not in front of her. Never in front of her. Late-night whispers. Behind closed doors. In low voices that carried anyway. Words like, "She needs supervision. We can't leave her alone. She forgets to turn off the stove. What if she falls? What if something happens while we're out?" All valid concerns, all spoken with worry, but worry has a sharp edge, and it cut her slowly. The day things truly shifted was a Sunday. We always had Sunday dinners together. Not fancy, just warm. A roast chicken or soup, bread, vegetables, laughter filling the room. But this Sunday was different. My grandmother was setting the table, something she had done every Sunday of my life. Only now she moved slowly, carefully, one dish at a time. She placed a plate in front of my father, then paused, uncertain, as if trying to remember where the cups went. Even when it wasn't. Even when I pretended it wasn't. But part of her had already left long before she walked out our door. The part of her that believed she belonged to us. And that was the part we should have protected, but we didn't. And time? Time does not give back what it takes. Her health declined in gentle, steady steps, not sudden, just fading, like the slow dimming of a candle. One day, the nurse called. Her voice was soft. "Too soft. Could you come?" she asked. "It would be good if you came soon." We drove there in silence. The winter sky outside was gray, the same gray as the morning she left. When we walked into her room, she looked so small in the bed, so still. She opened her eyes and smiled when she saw us, a real smile, warm, unbroken, as if she had been waiting. My mother cried quietly. My father held her hand, and I sat on the edge of the bed. She looked at me. "You grew," she whispered. I laughed, or something like a laugh, but tears filled my eyes. "I'm sorry," I said. There were 1,000 apologies behind those words. Things I should have done. Words I should have spoken. Moments I should have held on to. She squeezed my hand, weak but steady. "There is nothing to forgive," she said. "I knew you saw me, even when you were silent." Her breath was slower now. She looked past us, toward the window, toward something none of us could see. "I had a good life," she whispered. Then she closed her eyes, and the room became the quietest place I have ever been. The kind of quiet that stays inside you. The kind that never leaves. This is where the world stopped. But the story didn't end. Here, there is still the part where we learn to live. After the funeral. The house felt different. Not just empty, not just quiet. Changed. Like the walls themselves were holding their breath. Like the air was waiting for something that would never return. Her chair was still by the window. The cushion still slightly indented where she always sat. The house still smelled faintly like her. Warm tea leaves, old cotton, lavender soap. But she was gone. People say grief is loud. That it comes in waves, crashing and relentless. But for me, grief arrived like she lived. Quietly. It settled in the corners of rooms. In the silence at breakfast. In the way the house creaked at night. In the moments when I almost called her name, before remembering it wasn't a storm. It was a shadow. A soft, constant presence. My mother was the first to break. She tried to keep herself busy at first, cleaning, reorganizing, dusting shelves that didn't need dusting. But one afternoon, she found my grandmother's apron, the one with the faded floral print. She stood there, holding it in her hands, and she cried in a way I had never heard before. Not loud, just broken. A grief that came from realizing she had been trying so hard to manage life that she forgot to love gently. My father held her. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. Some truths don't need words. I took longer to face reality. At first, I told myself I was fine, but every night, I lay awake replaying moments I wished I could change. The tea spill. The kitchen table. The moment she apologized for existing. There are memories that sit in your chest like a stone, not heavy enough to crush you, but heavy enough to never forget. And then there were her words, spoken long before I understood them, seeing as a blessing. But if you see and stay silent, it becomes a burden. I had seen her fading, and I had stayed quiet, and now I understood what it meant to carry that. Not guilt, not regret, something deeper. The kind of knowing that changes who you are. I began visiting the senior home regularly, not to see her. She wasn't there anymore, but to see the others, the ones sitting alone in the lounge, the ones staring at the window the way she used to, the ones waiting for someone who may never come. At first, I just sat with them. No agenda, no heroic mission, Just presence. A man with trembling hands taught me how to play checkers. A woman with bright eyes told me stories about her first love. Another asked me the same question 3 times in 10 minutes, and I answered it each time, gently, because I understood now. Sometimes, the smallest grace you can offer someone is patience. One afternoon, one of the residents looked at me and said, "You listen differently. Not many people do that." "Thank you," and I realized my grandmother had given me something after all, not through words, through example, through the way she loved, quietly, steadily, softly. She had taught me how to see, and now I chose not to stay silent. As time passed, our home slowly changed too. Not back to what it was. It never could. But into something more aware. My mother began setting an extra napkin at dinner. Not for someone to use, but as a reminder to make room. My father started speaking more gently. Not loudly, just with presence, and I learned to say things while the people I love are still here to hear them. I appreciate you. I'm glad you're in my life. Tell me about your day. Sit with me a while. Simple words. Words she deserved to hear more often. One spring morning, I walked past her garden, now overgrown, wild with new green. I sat in the grass and let the sunlight warm my face. The wind rustled the leaves, and for a moment, I felt her there, not as a memory, not as a lesson, not as regret, but as something gentle, a presence, soft and steady. I closed my eyes and whispered, "I see you." And this time, I didn't stay silent. This story is not about blame. It's about the quiet ways love can fade when life becomes too busy. About the small moments that matter more than we realize. About how people do not need grand gestures, only to feel remembered. If you have someone in your life who is growing older, sit with them, even in silence. Especially in silence. Ask them about their childhood. Let them tell the same story twice. Hold their hand when they forget a word, because one day you will stand in a quiet room, and all you will wish for is one more conversation, one more cup of tea, one more morning with their chair not empty. Love does not need to be loud. It only needs to be given while there is still time. My mother reached out, gently to guide her. "It's all right," she said. "Let me finish. You go sit." My grandmother froze. She didn't sit. She just stood there. Something fragile in her expression cracked. A tiny, almost invisible shift. She realized in that moment that she was no longer needed. Not really, not in the ways she used to be. She sat down eventually, but she didn't eat much that evening. She didn't speak. She just stared at her plate as if trying to remember how meals used to feel. After dinner, I found her in the living room, folding and refolding the same small handkerchief in her lap. Over and over, as if keeping her hands busy could keep her heart from falling apart. I sat beside her. She didn't look up. After a long silence, she said softly, "It is strange to remain in a place and slowly feel like a guest." Her voice didn't have bitterness, just a quiet truth it hurt to hear. But I didn't know what to say, so I said nothing, and that silence has followed me for years. Time drifted on. My grandmother grew more forgetful. She misplaced keys. Left the kettle on once, asked the same question twice in 10 minutes. She began writing things down in a small notebook. Reminders, appointments, simple tasks like water plants or take morning pills. But even the notebook sometimes confused her. She would flip through it, frowning, searching for something she could not recall. Once, I heard her crying in her room, not loudly, just small, broken sobs. It was the sound of someone grieving their own mind. I stood, outside the door, my hand almost lifted to knock. But I didn't. I walked away, and I have never forgiven myself for that. The conversations in the house changed. Tone around this time. Concerns became complaints. Worry became frustration. Patience began to thin. Little remarks. "I already told you that." "You just asked that a minute ago." "Please, just sit. Please." Always followed by sighs. Not cruel, just tired. But tiredness can bruise too. My grandmother heard every sigh and absorbed every one like they were her fault. The real shift came when my mother suggested something she had been holding back for months. We should consider assisted living. The words hung in the air, not shouted, not emotional, just practical. My father didn't respond. I didn't either, and my grandmother, who had been in the doorway, paused. She didn't speak. She didn't ask what it meant. She simply went to her room and closed the door. Very quietly, like she didn't want to disturb anyone. After that, she changed, not physically, emotionally. She stopped humming in the morning, stopped sitting on the porch for long, stopped asking me to walk with her to the corner store. She became careful with her footsteps, careful with her voice, careful with her presence, as if she was trying to take up less and less space. I noticed all of it, every quiet withdrawal, every slow retreat inward, and I stayed quiet, because I didn't know how to hold a grief I didn't understand, because I thought things would get better, or fix themselves, or time would soften it. But time doesn't soften what we avoid. It sharpens it, and soon, the house no longer felt like home to her, and she no longer felt like she belonged. Not because anyone stopped loving her, but because no one remembered to show it. That winter, everything finally reached a breaking point, but that part hurts the most to tell. And I'll tell it slowly, because some memories can only be unfolded gently. Winter arrived early that year. The kind of winter where the sky feels heavy and the wind seems to carry memories rather than cold. The trees outside our house stood bare and quiet, like they were listening. My grandmother sat by the window more often now. Always the same chair, always looking outside. Not at anything in particular, just out. Sometimes I wondered if she was remembering something only she could see. Sometimes I wondered if she was just waiting. The rest of the house moved around her. My mother hurried through mornings. My father left early and returned late. I buried myself in schoolwork, deadlines, college applications. Life continued. But my grandmother's world slowed to a stillness none of us knew how to sit with. She didn't ask for help. She didn't complain. She simply became quiet, and quiet grief is the hardest grief to see. One evening, I came downstairs to find her sitting at the kitchen table with her coat on. The coat she only wore when going out, the dark blue one with the small stitched flowers on the collar. Her hands were folded neatly in her lap. I didn't think much of it. "Are you cold?" I asked. She smiled gently, but her eyes were tired. "No," she whispered. "Just remembering who I used to be." I didn't understand what she meant. Not then. Just like all the other things I didn't understand until it was too late. The exact moment things broke happened on a Thursday. It was ordinary in every way. The kind of day you forget until it becomes unforgettable. My mother had a difficult day at work. My father came home irritated about something minor. I was exhausted from exams. The air in the house was tight, stretched thin. My grandmother had made tea. She carried the tray from the kitchen to the living room. Her hands shook more than usual that day, and the tray slipped, just a little, but enough. The cups rattled. One tipped. Hot tea spilled across the table and onto the floor. My father stood up quickly. Too quickly. "Mom, please," he said, frustration leaking through his voice even though he tried to hide it. "Just sit. Let us handle things. You don't need to do this anymore." It wasn't anger. It wasn't cruel. It was tired, but tired words can wound deeply. My grandmother froze. Her eyes lowered. Her hands stayed suspended in the air for a moment, as if she was trying to remember what to do with them. Then she apologized. Softly. Quietly. More than once. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to be trouble." She knelt to clean the spilled tea. My mother rushed to stop her. No, please, just sit. Please, Mom, just sit." But my grandmother stayed on her knees, wiping the floor with trembling hands. I watched. I saw the humiliation in her posture, the grief in her shoulders, the fading in her eyes, and I did nothing. I didn't help her. I didn't lift her up. I didn't say, "You're allowed to be here." I just stood there, like a coward, and I have replayed that moment in my mind thousands of times. That night she ate dinner in silence. Not silence like before, but a silence that felt like goodbye. She went to bed early. Before she closed her door, she looked at me. Her eyes held something I didn't recognize then. Resignation. A soft acceptance of something painful. At the time, I thought she was tired, but now I know she had made a decision. The next morning, she was gone. Not the kind of gone where she vanished or disappeared. The kind of gone that is quiet and intentional. She left before dawn. While the house slept, while the world was still blue and cold and half dreaming, she folded her nightgown neatly on her bed, placed her small notebook on the pillow, and took only a small suitcase, the old one with worn leather corners. On the kitchen table she left a note. Not long. Not emotional, just tidy handwriting. I love you. Thank you for my years here. But I don't want to be a burden. I will be all right. No signature. But she didn't need one. We knew. The note might as well have been a knife. My mother cried first. A quiet, overwhelmed cry that came in waves. My father tried to stay composed, but his hands shook while dialing the phone, calling neighbors, calling relatives, calling anyone. I stood there frozen. The world felt unreal. The house, our house, felt wrong, like it had lost something essential. My grandmother had left, not out of anger, not out of emotion. She left because she believed we would live better without her. And I realized. She didn't feel wanted, not loved. That's different. She knew we loved her, but love without space, without patience, without dignity. Love without being seen. It is a lonely love. We found her the next afternoon, at a small senior home in the next town. She had gone there herself, walked slowly, carefully to the bus stop, paid the fare, spoke to the receptionist with her gentle voice. She checked herself in. She didn't ask us to come. She didn't call, didn't cry. She simply removed herself from the space where she felt she no longer fit. When we arrived, she smiled. Not with joy, not with sadness, with peace. A peace that broke me, because she shouldn't have had to find peace away from us. We stood around her, my mother, my father, and me, and none of us knew what to say. There were apologies, too many and not enough. There were promises and too late to mean anything. There were tears, but tears cannot undo silence. My grandmother placed her hand over mine. Her hand felt smaller than it used to. "It's all right," she said. "I'm all right. I don't want to trouble anyone. I have lived a long life. I only want to be where I take up the space meant for me." I wanted to say something, anything, but my throat closed. Words stayed trapped. And seeing that, she only smiled more softly, as if she had always known I wouldn't speak, as if she forgave me before I even asked. I visited her after that. Not enough. Never enough, but I went. We sat together, talked sometimes, sat in silence other times, and every time I left, she would look at me with a quiet tenderness that felt like a farewell.